What's this state thing I mentioned? In general, state is data or information your app or your widgets in your app use. State can be things like a username, or in our case, the index of the question we want to show. So app-wide state would be things like, is the user authenticated? Or if we're building an app that users can use to find new jobs, we could have the overall jobs we loaded from a server. Widget state could be things like the current user input, or are we currently loading data and do we want to show a spinner, or as in our application, the widget state of the app widget we have could be which question is currently selected. And that state can and typically will change in an application. However, as the name suggests, since we're extending a stateless widget here, this widget can't have state. Now that might sound very restrictive and strange, since we typically have interactive applications where things should change. Why would we have widgets that can't change? Well, typically in your Flutter application, you will have more than one widget, and we'll soon have more than one widget here as well. And some widgets are only there to output something, like that text widget, which is built into Flutter. This is a widget which has no state in it. It gets the text from outside passed in. That is passed in when the widget is created, so it never changes whilst the widget is there. And it just outputs the text. It does nothing else. It doesn't react to clicks on the text or anything like that. Therefore, text would be a perfect stateless widget, and indeed it is. And a lot of the widgets are only concerned with outputting data with certain styles, certain colors, or in a certain structure. Some widgets, however, need to change data. Like our app here, we want to change that question index. And for this, we can convert that stateless widget into a so-called stateful widget. The difference between stateless and stateful widgets is that in a stateless widget, we have our widget and the build method, which is used to render the UI. Now we can pass in data from outside into the stateless widget through the constructor of that class, so of the widget class. We'll do this later too. And this data can change, and actually Flutter would rebuild that widget when that external data changes. But inside of the widget class, the data will never change. We can only receive new data from outside, and that will basically rebuild the widget. Now, a stateful widget also has a build method that builds a widget and that renders a UI, therefore. But here, we can also get our input data, so data passed in through the constructor of the widget class. But we also can have some internal state, and that's the core thing here. And this widget will get re-rendered, so the user interface will get updated by Flutter whenever either that external, that input data changed, or when our internal state changed. That's the core difference. And here we really just have a My App widget, which doesn't take any input data, so it doesn't even take that. But it certainly can't have internal data, internal state, because it's a stateless widget. Now, how can we turn this into a stateful widget now? For turning this into a stateful widget, you could think that you simply rename this into stateful widget, but now we have an error, because it's not that simple. You also can refactor this in Visual Studio Code and Android Studio if you have the Flutter extension installed, which you should have. Then you can check your key bindings and search for refactor. And you should find a key binding which you can use to get refactoring suggestions. And if you place your cursor on stateless widgets, if you click on that and you then use that key binding, here I get the suggestion of converting this to a stateful widget. We could do that, and in the future we will take advantage of this because it's super fast. But here I won't do that because I want to show you what makes up a stateful widget step by step. Now, the first step is indeed that you rename this to stateful widget. Stateful widget, is a class provided by the material package here. So this exists, so you can use that. Now, however, a stateful widget is a bit more complex than a stateless widget. It's actually not just one class, it's instead a combination of two classes. So let's close the curly brace of our first class here. Let's add a second class with all of that content down there with the build method and so on being part of that second class. This is now typically named myAppState. Not myAppState, but your widget name plus state after it. So in this case, myAppState, because my widget here is also named myApp. myAppState now extends state. And now you can open your curly brace again. State, again, is a class imported from Material Dart, and state is a generic class. Now comes the more complex part. Why do we have two classes, first of all? Because the way Flutter works internally, into which I'll dive a bit deeper later, is that the widget itself can be recreated. This class can be recreated. When the external data changes, this will be recreated, basically. The state, however, is persistent. It's attached to that widget, so it's attached to that element in the user interface which you see. But unlike that class here, it's technically not recreated. And that's important for storing your state, so that when the question index changes and the external data passed into the widget itself changes, only that is rewritten, is rebuilt, and our data here is not reset. And if that's not entirely clear yet, it will become clearer once we start passing data into the widget itself. So we have that separation so that this data here, the state, can be persistent, whilst this widget itself can be rebuilt. Now we need to tell Flutter that this state class belongs to this widget class, however. To us humans, to us developers, it's clear because of the naming, myAppState and myApp, but the naming is just a convention, it's not a rule. And therefore, Flutter does not take the name as an indicator that this class here belongs to this widget. Instead, to set up a connection, we need two things. First of all, state is a generic type, so we should add angle brackets there, and in between, we add a pointer at our class here. So here I add myApp. This tells Dart and Flutter that this state belongs to the myApp class. So this is one part of the connection. The second part has to be done here inside of the myApp class, so inside of the widget. There, we have to add a new method, the createState method. Now here I get a suggestion by my IDE, and if I hit enter, it automatically adds it for me. Now createState, as you can see, is a method that takes no arguments, but that in the end has to return a state object, which is connected to a stateful widget. Now that's exactly what we have down there. It's an object that's of type state in the end, because it inherits from state, and that is connected to myApp, which is a stateful widget. So here we want to return a new myAppState object. Here we create a new object based on that class, which also knows about this class, and therefore we now connected the two pieces, the two classes, from both ends. Here we also have override again, because createState is a method provided by stateful widget. It needs to be overwritten, and again, to be clear that we are doing this deliberately, we add override here. Now we have that connection set up from both sides. And now, with this change, the build method is now inside the state, not inside the widget, because the state holds the data that is used by the build method. With this now changed, and nothing else changed, if we now save this, and we restart our application, because if you do such a transformation, hot reload typically doesn't work, so you need to do a full restart with that green arrow here, or the shortcut which it shows there. Now, with that, if you go back and you click answer 1, please watch the what's your favorite color text. Still nothing changes. We see the output go up there with the print statement, which is still part of answer question, but still nothing changes in the UI. Well, the reason for that is that still, even with this transformation to stateful widget and state, Flutter doesn't automatically update and re-render the user interface just because we tap the button. And that's good, because for performance it would not be that great if Flutter would re-render the user interface on every tap of the user. If we tap somewhere and Flutter takes this as an indicator to re-render everything, then our app would certainly have a horrible performance. Instead, we have to tell Flutter that we're about to change the state, and that when this state is changed, it should re-render this widget. We do that by wrapping the code where we do change data inside of our state that is reflected in the user interface. And the question index is of course reflected because it controls which question is shown. So when we change that, we wrap this in a setState function. SetState is a function, or a method to be precise, that is provided by that state class which we inherit. And setState takes a function, typically an anonymous function, so a function here with no arguments and then the function body. And inside of this function, which we passed to the setState function, so a function that takes a function as an argument, that's just how it is. Inside of this function, we move that code where we change our property in this case, the property which also is used in build. Now with that, if we now save this and we do a full restart, if you now watch what's your favorite color and I click answer 1, you see now it changes to what's your favorite animal. And this now happens because of setState and us using a stateful widget. Now throughout this course, we'll work with both stateless and stateful widgets. As you will learn, the majority of widgets will actually be stateless, because more often than not, you're just concerned with outputting something in a nice way. But occasionally, you need to change data. You need to react to user input and change something, and then we'll use stateful widgets, which are the other core type of widget Flutter supports and knows. By the way, please note that if you press this more than once, you of course get an error, because then you change question index to 2, and you would try to access the third question, which we of course don't have.